close your eyes for a second. No sirens, no subway rumble, no 10,000 conversations happening simultaneously in 40 languages. Instead, the hollow echo of a shipbuilder's mallet, the deep breath of Atlantic wind through oak forests, the rhythmic crash of waves against a shoreline so clean it looks like something from a dream. What if I told you the DNA of the most powerful city on Earth was written by a corporation? What if America's culture of ambition, hustle, and tolerance didn't come from the founding fathers? What if it came from Dutch merchants who built a muddy trading post 360 years ago? And what if Wall Street was once literally a wall, built in fear, torn down in greed? Stay right here, because we're pulling back the curtain on New Amsterdam, the forgotten city underneath New York. And what we find is going to completely change how you see modern America. This is Manhattan. The year is 1660. At the very southern tip of this island, something extraordinary is happening. A town is being born, not a village, not a camp, a city in embryo, already breathing with ambition, chaos, and raw commercial hunger. The Lenape people knew this island as Mannahatta, meaning something like Island of Many Hills. But the Dutch settlers had their own name for what they were building. They called it New Amsterdam. We've built an AI reconstruction based on the famous 1660 Castello Plan, the oldest surviving detailed map of Manhattan. And what you see isn't the rough frontier outpost you might expect. What you see is a city, small, muddy, but alive in a way that feels shockingly familiar. We start at the southern tip, Fort Amsterdam. Forget the romantic stone castles and soaring towers. This was not that. Fort Amsterdam was a working, sweating, arguing machine. Part military outpost, part fur warehouse, part corporate headquarters. It ran like a startup, permanently one bad quarter away from collapse. And at the center of it all stood one man, Peter Stuyvesant. Silver-banded wooden leg, iron will, zero patience for nonsense. Stuyvesant wasn't a king, he was an executive, a company man sent to squeeze maximum profit from this island. He stood on those ramparts every morning like a man counting money he hadn't made yet. Step inside the fort and chaos hits you instantly. Clerks bent over tables, frantically inventorying beaver pelts, the brown gold of the 17th century. Every single pelt was destined for the fashion houses of Europe. New Amsterdam was the pipeline. And the sound of the place was extraordinary. French from Huguenot refugees, German, English, Swedish, Portuguese, 18 languages in a town of 1,500 people. Underneath it all, the guttural business-like Dutch of the men running the show. Even in 1660, New Amsterdam was having an identity crisis, and somehow that was its greatest strength. Leave the fort and walk north along Pearl Street. The name isn't romantic poetry, it's oysters. The Manhattan coastline was blanketed with oyster beds, so thick their shells shimmered like scattered pearls in the sun. But forget the oysters. Look at these houses. If you were expecting crude log cabins and frontier survival shelters, you are in for a shock. The Dutch didn't leave Amsterdam behind when they crossed the Atlantic. They packed it in their luggage. Narrow, tall houses with brilliant red and yellow brick facades, some of that brick carried across the ocean as ship ballast. Distinctive stepped gable rooftops reaching upward like staircases to the sky. Step inside a wealthy merchant's home, and the luxury is almost offensive. Persian rugs on the floors, Chinese porcelain on the mantels, oak cabinets filled with ledgers tracking goods from 3 continents. Here's what's radical. In New Amsterdam, status wasn't measured by bloodline. No aristocracy, no landed nobility, no coat of arms that could get you into a room. The only question that mattered was, who are you in the global trade network? That was the entire social contract. Sound familiar? Now turn on to Stone Street, the first paved street in Manhattan.
Residents got so fed up with ankle-deep mud that they pooled their own money and paid for the cobblestones themselves. That is the most New York thing that has ever happened. And what lined this freshly paved street? Taverns. Everywhere, taverns. Observers noted with alarm that an absurd proportion of New Amsterdam's buildings were dedicated to alcohol. But this wasn't just drinking, this was infrastructure. Walk into a tap house at sunset, the air dense with roasted meat, tobacco smoke, and sour local beer. A Caribbean sailor describing a sea battle he may or may not have witnessed. A German craftsman and a Long Island farmer arguing loudly over timber prices. Nobody agrees on anything, but nobody's leaving either. The tavern was the community center, stock exchange, courtroom, newsroom, and therapy office all in one. This is where deals got made, where gossip became policy, where a rumor from Amsterdam shifted commodity prices by morning. Now here's where New Amsterdam does something genuinely revolutionary. In September 1654, a small ship arrived carrying 23 Jewish refugees fleeing persecution in Dutch Brazil. They were broke, exhausted, and desperate. Stuyvesant wrote to company directors in Amsterdam requesting permission to throw them out. His letter was blunt. He didn't want them there. The company directors wrote back, no. Not from idealism, not from some grand vision of human dignity, but because several directors were themselves Jewish investors, and these refugees could work, trade, and contribute. That was the moment the pattern was set, the template was written. New Amsterdam became a place where your faith, ancestry, and language were nobody's business. What mattered was whether you could pull your weight in the economy. This wasn't idealism, it was pragmatism, and that made it more durable than idealism ever could be. By 1660, Catholics, Jews, Quakers, and Lutherans all shared a settlement of barely 1,500 people. When had anything like that existed before? This is the origin story of the New York we know today, the city that treats talent as your only credential. Before we get to the part where everything changes, I want to hear from you. If you could walk through any historical city at its peak, where would you go? Ancient Rome? Medieval Baghdad? The Aztec capital city, Tenochtitlan? Drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one, and your answer might become our next episode. Now look north. The windmills are turning. These weren't decorative. They were engines, grinding grain, powering sawmills, keeping the shipyards alive. New Amsterdam was a city of makers, everyone in a permanent state of hustle. And their most audacious piece of infrastructure? The canal. The Dutch dug a waterway called the Heergracht straight through the middle of town. Trading vessels could glide from the harbor directly to the warehouses. No roads, no dragging, no chaos. For a moment, this was a miniature Venice, small boats moving silently between rows of brick houses. The Dutch didn't build monuments, they built things that worked. That canal, the Heergracht, is now Broad Street, one of the world's great financial corridors. Every inch of lower Manhattan is a palimpsest. Scratch the surface and you find the Dutch beneath. But we cannot walk through this city and pretend it was a utopia, because it wasn't. Enslaved people brought from Africa and other Dutch colonies built this city's roads, loaded its ships, and constructed its fort. Many were granted half freedom. They could own land and marry regally, but could be called back to company service at any moment. Their children were not free. The condition was always conditional, always revocable. The relationship with the Lenape was never stable. Cycles of trade, tension, and brutal colonial violence scarred both peoples. New Amsterdam was not innocent. Its prosperity was built on layers, and the deepest layer was suffering. Now we reach the northern edge, and here stands the most famous structure New Amsterdam ever built, the Wall. Not stone, not towering, a palisade of sharpened wooden posts driven into the earth. It stretched the full width of the island, from the East River to the Hudson, built in fear, fear of the English, fear of reprisals, fear of the dark frontier beyond. The men who patrolled it weren't soldiers, they were bakers, blacksmiths, and merchants with muskets. And here is one of history's great ironies. This wall never stopped a single invasion. When the threat came in 1664, it came from the sea. 4 English warships in the harbor, cannons aimed at the fort. Stuyvesant climbed to the ramparts himself, looked down the barrel of English aggression, and said no. But the merchants did what they always did. They calculated. A war we cannot win will destroy everything we have. That was the equation. The petition to surrender had hundreds of signatures. Stuyvesant, furious and humiliated, climbed down. On September 8, 1664, the Dutch flag came down and the city was renamed New York. The wall was torn down as the city grew, and the path beside it was paved over and given a name, Wall Street. New Amsterdam lasted only 40 years, a heartbeat in the timeline of history. But the English didn't inherit a blank slate. They inherited a city shaped by commerce, diversity, and pragmatism.
New York remained unusually tolerant for an English colony, too commercially valuable to dismantle. Those crooked, narrow streets in Lower Manhattan that confuse every tourist, those aren't accidents. Those are the original Dutch property lines, the ghost of New Amsterdam printed into the asphalt. Cookies, Santa Claus, the word boss, all gifts from the residents of New Amsterdam, absorbed so deeply into American culture that we've forgotten where they came from. New Amsterdam didn't just build a city, it prototyped a civilization. It answered the question the modern world still struggles with. How do different people share a crowded space? Their answer wasn't a speech, a revolution, or a declaration. It was a deal. If we can trade together, we can live together. Rome was built on the sword. New York was built on a ledger. When you stand at Battery Park and look out at that harbor, you're not just looking at history. You're looking at the first draft of the modern world. New Amsterdam vanished from every map, but it never left this island. It lives in the pulse of the trading floor, in the 800 languages on the subway, in every immigrant who makes it work. That's the Dutch blueprint, still running, still building. Now, if the Dutch had never surrendered in 1664, what would New York look like today? A Venice of the West with canals instead of avenues? A Dutch-speaking empire rivaling London? Tell me in the comments. I want to read every theory. And if this kind of deep dive into hidden history is something you want more of, subscribe right now. Every episode, we rebuild a lost city with AI reconstruction and cinematic storytelling. Ancient Rome, the Aztec capital, Golden Age Baghdad, Constantinople on the night it fell. They're all coming, and you don't want to arrive late. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and we'll see you in the next one, where the past isn't dead, it's waiting.